Hi, welcome to our first event, live event on Friday of the 2020 APA Virtual Convention. I'd like to just make a quick plug. My name is Daniel Benkendorf, and I am the 2020 Program Chair for Division 34. And if this is your first session that you're participating in, I welcome you here, and I'd also like to invite you to future sessions that we have, both today and tomorrow. So of course this one, after this one at 1:45 Eastern, we will have a presidential forum and town hall, which will run from 1:45 to 3 Eastern, where our president, Ezra Markowitz, will lead a conversation with past presidents and incoming ones as well about the direction of the division. So we'd love to have you there. Also tomorrow, we have one final live event, which will take place at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's a conversation with Dr. Philip Zimbardo and Dr. Shari Kuchenbecker, who will discuss the growing activism among the youth around the climate crisis. So that'll be an interesting conversation as well. We invite you there. But for now, I want to place all of our attention on the three speakers and researchers that we have with us this afternoon. And what we have is a session called Increasing Pro-Environmental Behavior. It's an interactive question and answer. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to take a look at the pre-recorded talk that these three put together, but it's excellent, and I highly recommend it. If you've registered for APA, you will have access to that for the next year. But they're here to talk a little bit about their research and answer your questions. So I'll turn it over to our chair, Nicole Sintov.
Thank you, Daniel. Excited to be here. So I would like to introduce my panelists today. We have Kristin Hurst, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Ohio State in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. And we also have Alexia Lamb, who just recently graduated with her master's from Clarkson University. And Daniel already introduced me, so I won't do that again. But what we'll have for you today, we each are going to kind of briefly summarize our presentations in case you didn't have a chance to watch those yet. And then we will have Q&A. So we have a few discussion questions that we've prepared in advance, and then we would love to answer audience questions as well. So please type those in the Q&A box, and I'll be monitoring that. Okay. So without further ado, we can go ahead and get started with our overviews. Kristin, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my research project that I presented on was about understanding how our emotions influence sustainable outcomes, such as pro-environmental behavior and intentions. And in particular, we were interested in understanding how different types of emotional responses that can be evoked through environmental messaging might differentially motivate behavior change. So specifically, we were interested in comparing the effects of anticipated emotional states to actual felt or experienced emotional states. So to this end, we ran an experiment to compare how people responded to positive or negative feedback messages that were designed to either evoke experienced emotions by telling people that the feedback that they read was based on their actual past behavior, or by asking people, or by evoking anticipated emotions, by asking them to imagine how they think they would feel if they were to receive the same feedback following, based on their behavior over the coming week. So what we found was that there was no relationship between pride that was evoked through positive feedback, and that regardless of whether it was evoked through messages that tried to evoke anticipated emotions or experienced emotions. However, we did find that guilt mediated the relationship between both negative feedback messages and pro-environmental intentions. So the feedback message that evoked anticipated feelings of guilt and the feedback message that evoked experienced feelings of guilt. However, what we thought was interesting was that there was only a total or overall positive effect of the feedback message on the sustainable outcome, which in this case was pro-environmental intentions, when participants read a message that experienced negative emotion, the negative emotion of guilt. So this suggests that there's something else, that the message that evoked the anticipated emotion, when people read that message, there was something else that was counteracting or overriding the what should have been the motivating effect of guilt, and thus rendering that message overall less effective at promoting sustainable outcomes.
Thank you, Kristin. I'm excited to do some Q&A on that. Can we now move on to Alexia, and can we hear a brief overview of your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the intro. Thanks for joining us today. So with my work, I conducted 2 studies involving multi-party environmental negotiations. So before each of these negotiations, I administered surveys inquiring about the individual's moral and environmental values and norms. So with students at Clarkson University, they then took part in the cases. So one of these simulations had 3 different role assignments, 3 parties, and the other had 6 parties. And immediately following each of these cases, post surveys were administered that dealt with team level factors, including conflict, power struggle, and fault line formation. So basically the teams dividing into segments. I also included in the post survey some questions about more subjective outcomes. So asking how they felt about their own performance, how they felt about others in the group, the process overall, etc. And I tallied up some objective outcomes with scoring systems specific to each of the negotiation cases to kind of see how each person did taking on their roles. So the results of these revealed that fault line development as well as team power struggle were significant mediators. So that relationship existed between individual level factors as well as these outcomes, both subjective and objective. Specifically with fault line, saw some outcomes that were, positive relationships. People felt even if there were fault lines, maybe they performed well, but if there was a fault line, maybe they didn't enjoy their team as much or the process itself. And there were also some interesting relationships between moral and environmental factors themselves. So kind of highlighting that connection there. So found some interesting relationships in both of the studies that I'll be happy to talk about a little bit more.
Awesome, looking forward to that. All right, and then in my project, which was actually a joint project with Kristin, as well as my collaborator, Grant Donnelly at OSU Fisher College of Business, we were looking to understand the influence of conversations and conversation dynamics on behavior in the sustainability domain. And we conducted 3 experiments with peer dyads that assessed observed behaviors spanning from residential energy use to environmental policy support. So in study 1, we ran a field experiment looking at the effects of a joint commitment plus a conversation about living sustainably, on residential energy consumption. And this was conducted in a college dorm at Oberlin, thanks to our phenomenal collaborators there. And what we found is that participants who were assigned to complete a sustainability roommate agreement used 22% less electricity than controls over the course of the semester last year, which was a significant difference. In study 2, which was a lab study, we followed up to try and understand the influence of conversation partners' stance on the conversational outcomes. And so the study had about 300 participants come into the lab. They indicated their support or opposition to a policy intended to bring more plant-based foods to campus, and then were randomly assigned to converse with a Confederate who gave arguments either supporting or opposing that policy. After the conversation, participants had an opportunity to indicate their support for the policy by doing a mouse clicking task, whereby the number of clicks that they made resulted in donations to the plant-based foods policy. We found a main effect of Confederate stance, whereby speaking with a policy supporting Confederate resulted in more clicking or more effort, but this was qualified by a significant interaction with participant stance. So among participants who supported the policy at baseline, Confederate stance had no influence on their clicking effort. But importantly, among those who opposed the policy at baseline, speaking with a more supportive Confederate resulted in greater effort. And then study 3 replicated that interaction effect using an online context where we had people do a writing task instead of a face-to-face discussion, which arguably could have introduced other non-specific factors that could have provided alternate explanations other than this stance manipulation that we were trying to investigate. So in summary, our research provides some causal evidence of the influence of conversations on sustainable behavior and highlights the importance of an individual's stance on their own as well as their conversation partner's subsequent behavior. Okay, so some questions that I have for us. The studies all use fairly unique methodologies, and attendees here might be interested in learning more about methodologies like I am. So let's talk methods a little bit. So Alexia, can you tell us a little bit about how the simulated negotiations were set up and facilitated in your project? And specifically how students were assigned to like the specific roles in the negotiation?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to actually work with a negotiations class at my university. So each semester saw maybe between about 40 and 50 students. So I pretty much just worked with one semester. So I was able to work with those students. They were not, required to participate in the negotiations for my research purposes, but it was encouraged for them to take those surveys and participate. And I also reached out to students in other classes within both the business school at Clarkson and also with my school that I was under, the Institute for Sustainable Environment. So I was able to get some awesome professors whose students were either willing to work with me outside of the normal class time, or a few instances I was able to work during class time when maybe the professors were out of town for conferences or things like that. So just kind of tried to be flexible with the schedules there and work with as many students as possible. So with each of these groups, I was responsible for just getting them the materials ahead of time about the negotiations themselves. Of course, there's a decent amount of background information to kind of set the scene for things, understand what their role is, what they're fighting for, why it came to be. For instance, in one of my negotiations, it had to do with a paper company in Costa Rica. So why are we negotiating? What are some of the issues on the table? So just making sure students had ample time to be familiar with the cases themselves. So those were all administered online, well in advance to the actual, negotiation. And hopefully they all prepared and, did their homework. And of course, some students will inevitably look into it a little bit more than others, but everyone came in pretty prepared. I was impressed with how a lot of the students, seemed to know their stuff. So yeah, that was pretty much how I set things up beforehand. I gave the pre-survey beforehand, held those negotiations either during class time or some kind of designated time outside of class that the students were available. And then the post-surveys, I requested that they fill those out immediately after finishing the negotiation. So of course, a little wiggle room there if, class time was up or something, but just make sure they filled them out when everything was still really fresh and, they could think about their team interactions and things like that. As far as role assignment, I actually used an awesome online platform for negotiations called iDecisions, and that randomly assigns the roles so that, as each student enters into iDecisions and signs up, they're given, this role, then the next person, the next role, and so on and so forth. So in a perfect world, everyone has, about a perfect number of teams. Of course, there's a little wiggle room here and there with the numbers in the classes and stuff. But yeah, so it was pretty random, but it worked out pretty well for these purposes. So yeah, hope that clears that up a little bit.
Thank you. And I guess if anyone's interested, if you want to put the URL for the iDecisions platform into the chat box at some point, then people can go and look it up if they're interested.
Oh, sure. That's a good idea. Yeah, I think there are like free subscriptions and things like that. But yeah, fortunately, we were able to use it for this purpose. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So I see that we have a Q&A, a question for Kristin. I'm going to ask our methods question first, and then I'm going to tag on to the question in the Q&A box. So Kristin, regarding methods, you used a creative design contrasting anticipated versus experienced feedback. How did you make the anticipated feedback believable? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, well, one thing what we did was we we told participants that they would be asked to do a follow-up study in 1 week's time, during which they would take a home energy footprint quiz. So we set it up so that they were anticipating that in 1 week they would be asked to participate in this quiz that they would then receive feedback on. So rather than just creating kind of a hypothetical scenario for people to sort of imagine, you know, if you were in this situation, how might you feel? We set it up so that they were actually anticipating having to go through this and thinking about how might I feel if I were to receive these this feedback. We reminded them a few times throughout the survey that they would be asked to take the quiz in another week. And we also, in the anticipated condition, we didn't, we were careful not to connect the feedback message that they read to any of their past behavior. So there was no reason to think that the feedback that they received was based on their past actions, which was different from the experience condition in which that connection was made explicitly.
Great. And then there's this question in the Q&A box. So from Dr. Ruth Richards, what about motivation of people based on aesthetic appreciation, allied with awe, humility, and a natural caring rather than guilt, and a sense of interdependent connection with nature? Here is an advanced empathy and wish to help, such as Rifkin, even perhaps calling on mirror neurons. Guilt can also lead to avoidance, distraction, even denial, as opposed to activity. How can we engage while uniting people in an essential cause?
Yeah, those are really good points and good questions. I didn't look at those constructs explicitly in this research, and a lot of the theory and literature I was basing this on was focused on self-conscious emotions that informed this. So those are questions that I think are interesting to look at for future research. I can't say exactly how that would have changed our results. What I can speak to a little bit more is this idea of guilt leading to avoidance and sort of defensive responses, such as, you know, reactance, avoidance, denial, those types of things. And I think that's interesting because that is what I actually expected to find. So these results to me were quite surprising because I had hypothesized that that the experienced guilt condition, which is what we actually found to be most effective, would be would not be effective. I was expecting people in that condition to exhibit some of these responses that you were suggesting. So to be honest, I don't actually know why we didn't see that. I was surprised. I think that you know, there's some potential reasons, like the context, you know, the feedback context that we used, and also looking at comparing experience versus anticipated guilt. One of the things that I found in the literature was that for thinking about effective forecasting and anticipated emotions, people actually expect that they will experience stronger emotions and that those emotions will last for a longer time than they actually end up experiencing. So there's one potential that we did see that a possibility, I guess, that we did see that reactance in the anticipated negative condition, but not in the experience, potentially because that the emotion that was evoked wasn't as strong. So it didn't create that that denial or that defensive response.
Interesting. Definitely some future avenues for research too. So I'm just going to be sensitive to time here and note that it's 1:20. We do have some more prepared questions, but if there are folks in the audience who would like to type questions into the Q&A box, I'll invite you to do so now, and we'll get to those. Another one of our prepared questions that I guess we can go into as people are typing. All of the talks focused on approaches that could be used to change behavior to promote more sustainable behavior. And the evidence suggests that, our efforts can be successful in some context. It seems relevant to discuss implications for practitioners who might consider using some of the interventions that were presented. So Alexia, practically speaking, what would you say the implications of your results are for managing a discussion amongst groups with competing interests?
Yeah, thanks. I think in any negotiation or, more commonly, maybe an informal discussion that you're having with someone else or a group of people, everyone's coming in with these different values and norms, et cetera. Of course, I just honed in on values and norms, both environmental and moral for my studies. This is something I think we're seeing more and more every day, a more polarized climate, especially looking at things like environmental issues. But I feel like a lot of ideas can turn into a hot topic pretty quickly these days. So I think one of the most practical approaches for this study is to go into a discussion aware of these deep level, these diversity factors and the impact they might have, how they might affect both subjective and objective outcomes of a discussion. Of course, in a everyday discussion you're having with someone, you can't necessarily win or lose, but I guess more subjectively you can, right? You can walk away feeling like, oh, I really, I think I made my point known, or, I really felt engaged in that in a positive way or a negative way. And I think fault lines should be considered. So before my work, I hadn't really assessed this in any way. It wasn't really something I was aware of when I was maybe in a group of people, but I definitely see them developing. I see subgroups forming. I think an interesting consideration right now too is with everything being virtual, it might seem less likely to notice people maybe going off into groups or things like that, but it's still very apparent to me. So just being aware of the way that discussions are being facilitated, and if it's being done in a way that's conducive to teamwork, or whether it's, maybe some people are definitely left field, maybe they're not really on the same page as everyone else. So as everyone's entering with preconceived notions, that, don't necessarily go into a discussion thinking you're going to change that, but make sure that the discussion itself is something beneficial, so that you're going to see some of these outcomes like I saw. Maybe people are going to come away with a more subjective positive outcome of how things went down. Maybe that will lend things a little bit better moving forward, if that makes sense. So, sorry, also mindful of time. I got a little chatty on that one.
Okay, there's lots of interesting implications here. So I'll tag on to that as well, since my study also focused on using conversations as a tool. And I will say that, one important implication, I think, of our findings are that the opinion of who you talk to matters. And it also matters where you start, right? So for people in our study who were more supportive of the environmental policy, whether or not they talked to, policy supporting Confederate or policy opposing Confederate, they still exerted quite a bit of effort in the policy support task. But amongst people who were not supportive, that's where we saw that interaction effect, where, if they were assigned to talk to a supportive Confederate, they resulted in more clicking. And so I think knowing the kind of baseline opinions of folks, before you set up a facilitated conversation, if your goal is to influence people to behave more sustainably, then knowing those starting stances is quite important, particularly amongst people who, are likely unsupportive to start. So that would be my suggestion for what to think about. I'm also seeing a question in the chat box from Atar Herziger. Hi, Atar. So Atar says, Nicole, in the manipulated conversations you conducted in the lab, did Confederates opposing plant-based meals influence the participants clicking in the clicking task? Yes, so there was a main effect of Confederate stance. There was also a main effect of participant stance. And then there was the interaction as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, Atar, but happy to catch up afterwards. we've got a few minutes left, and I have a question for Kristin. So she kind of alluded to this already in her response to the last question, but you used feedback, Kristin, to evoke emotions in your study. What other contexts, aside from feedback, do you think your results might apply to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that there could be potential for these results to translate to environmental messaging contexts more broadly, the implication being that based on our findings would suggest that it's more effective to ask people to reflect on past transgressions, on maybe something they regretted in the past, rather than to create scenarios, hypothetical scenarios to think about that have no connection to actual previous action. So you can think about this in context that might involve like sustainable marketing or environmental campaigning, where you ask people to, think about that thing you may have done in the past, that environmentally unfriendly thing, and how that made you feel. Well, here's an opportunity to do better. And so I think that that's another point that can't really say for sure with these data that I have, but maybe something interesting to look at in the future is I think that kind of efficacy piece might be important to our findings, because we didn't just say, oh, look how poorly you did and don't you feel bad. We said, we gave this negative feedback and then immediately afterwards asked people to respond to this pro-environmental intention scale, in which they kind of, had an opportunity to maybe cope with those negative feelings by saying like, oh, look, this is how, I got negative feedback, but this is how I can do better. Because it's sort of the scale that we use asked about 15 different behaviors that a person could engage in on a regular basis, like turning off the lights when you're in the house, or turning off the AC, or recycling, those types of things. So it could have provided some, ideas of how I can respond going forward. And so translating that to other scenarios, like a environmental campaign, or maybe you made the wrong choice in the past, but now you have this opportunity to donate to this cause, or to volunteer here, or same with like a sustainable marketing. Oh, look, you can purchase, you can make a difference through your purchasing choices, that type of thing. And to be clear, we don't know whether or not how that will translate. I think follow-up research would need to be done, but the implication is that there's potential for this to translate more broadly.
Okay. And then one final question, I guess, because we're up against time, for Kristin. In your background slides in the presentation, you cited some previous literature that has found a positive relationship between pride and pro-environmental outcomes, but your study did not find that. What do you make of the lack of relationship there?
Well, again, like that was a surprising, I think it was a surprising finding given past research and and some theory and what we would expect to find, especially with anticipated pride. I did think that anticipated pride would be a motivating scenario, but so the short answer is I don't know what's happening. I think it could be something to do with the feedback context, like I said. So I was just opining on different contexts that these results could translate to, but we don't know. I think it's important to do that follow-up research to figure out if these results do replicate outside of the feedback context. So it could be the context. It could also be something as simple as a measurement thing, but I'm not sure.
Fair enough. We don't always know. Okay, we're right at time, so I guess we will end there. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate your presence and your questions, and I guess I will pass it back to Daniel to tell us what's coming up next this afternoon and tomorrow.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Alexia and Kristin, for sharing what you did with us. We hope that you'll continue to think about submitting your work in the future to Division 34. It's been wonderful to hear about it. Folks, in 15 minutes, our next live session will begin, and it is our presidential forum and town hall. It runs again from 1:45 if you're on the East Coast, that's Eastern time, to 3. And it will be, I think, a really enlivening and productive conversation with a number of past leaders of the division. So looking forward to that. I'll be there. I hope to see all of you there as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then I like this one because it tells me something about the other people, if they recognize it or not. It tells me they have the same favorite show as me.
And there is where I went to college.
Yeah.
Okay, folks ready to get started?
Here.
Sure.
Great. So, hi everybody. I want to thank everyone for coming and attending today's presidential forum, both our speakers and folks here in attendance. It's nice to see people, it's nice to see all of you. And we haven't gotten to be in person in a while, and it might be a while still, but it is really nice to see all of your faces and all these familiar folks. So I'm going to do a quick intro for this presidential forum and town hall meeting session, and then I will ask all of our esteemed panelists to do very quick introductions, just remind us of their names, their current institutions, and if they remember what year they ran Division 34 as the president. And if there are any other roles that you've played within the division, I think it'd be nice to let folks know about those roles as well. So, so let me give a little bit of framing for this session, or at least the first part of the session, and then we'll kind of open things up for the town hall component, and hopefully people will have questions and they can post them to the Q&A, and we'll go for as long as we've got interest from the crowd and from the 10 of us who have our videos on. So my name's Ezra Markowitz. I'm the current president of Division 34 for another 5 days, I think, or 6 days. And I am excited to pass the gavel on to Daniel Benkendorf, who is at the bottom of my screen. He'll be our next president. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Conservation at UMass Amherst. And other roles that I've played in the division include the council representative for a couple of years, and I was also a member at large. And I think before that, I was on the student committee in some form that I'm sure I was drawn into by Beth Carlin, who's here with us today as well. So one of my primary goals as president for this past year of the division has been to try to find ways to push our small, but I think potentially mighty society to do more to support its members and to support the fields that the society represents, environmental conservation and population psychology. And so to that end, over the past year, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on things that we've been doing and initiatives that'll be moving forward as I move into the past president role and Daniel moves into the president's role. So one of the things that we've done to try and be more active as leaders of our field is to start this webinar series, the monthly webinar series that we've been doing this year. And I entirely, I hope that and expect that will continue through 2021. And it's been great to see folks signing into that. We've had dozens, if not over 100 people call in for each of those webinars so far this year. And our next one actually is coming up on Tuesday next week, just as a quick plug. Another thing that we did this year was to launch a new working group, the Climate Change and Mental Health Working Group. And Thomas Doherty, who's on the call with us right now, is one of our 3 co-chairs for that new group. And I've been really excited to see that launch over the last 6 months and to continue despite everything that's going on in the world. And actually, I think because of everything that's going on in the world, that group has a really critical role to play. And I hope that this will be the first of multiple working groups that we can get going over the next year and a half. I think this division has tended to be very top heavy in terms of what happened has come out of the presidents that you see in front of you, really, and to come out of the executive committee. And there are ways for us to get many more members from the broader community involved in the work that we do. And I think that's one of the major ways that we're going to increase our impact. And so I see the working groups as one of those opportunities for people to be able to. I think there's also more that we can be doing. And one of the ways that we can move our progress forward, I don't know who that is.
Just joined us, but I think somebody else got kicked off there, Ezra. We have lost one of our former leaders. Thomas?
Thomas is gone.
Bring it back. Somebody else has Janet's login for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know what that was.
So one of the things that I think we can be doing, though, better as a field is to reflect a little bit on where we've been and where we think we can be headed as a field. And so to that end, Daniel and I, Daniel Benkendorf, who's our incoming Division 34 president, as I mentioned, and I thought it'd be useful to bring together some of the leaders of this division to spend a little bit of time reflecting together with everybody who's in attendance and with one another on where this division's been, what we are and represent now, and where we can and should be headed in the future. And so I'm also really glad that we also have one of our, not only, well, Daniel is our incoming president, but Kim Wolski is also here, and she's our president-elect. So we've got leadership looking back, but also looking forward on our call today. And I'm hoping that our conversation can really kind of be oriented with an eye towards what we can and need to be doing in order to increase our positive impact on the state of the world and the communities in which we practice, at whatever scale makes sense for each of us as members of this community. So with that, what I want to first do is I want to ask all of our panels just to do quick self-introductions, and then I will get us kicked off with the first question. So just to make things go smoothly, I'll call briefly on people. So Kim, you're first up.
Sure. I'm Kim Wolski. I'm a Research Associate Assistant Professor in the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. And as Ezra said, I am the incoming president-elect.
Great. Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Clayton. I looked up, and much to my astonishment, I think I was president in 2007. Doesn't seem that long. I've also been secretary of the division and a council rep to APA Council. And I teach at the College of Worcester in Ohio.
Great, thank you, welcome. Britton.
I am Britton Scott. I am a professor in the psychology department at the University of St. Thomas. I served as president starting in 2014. I was secretary when Susan was president, so now I know that was in 2007. And I also have served as a member at large.
Thanks. Johnny?
I'm Johnny Fraser. I'm with Ethnology, Social Science Research Institute based in New York City. I was the president in 2018 to 2019. I am currently the past president for the next week, and I succeeded Beth Carlin in that role. Before that, I was secretary. So this is my 6th year on the executive.
Thanks, Johnny. Beth?
Yeah, I'm Beth Carlin. I was president 17 to 18. Before that, I served as treasurer, as well as, and then I was membership chair for 4 years or so. Before that, became a member at large position and I was program chair for the convention, and I want to say 14. Oh, and I run a small research institute called Sea Change that's based in Los Angeles.
Great, thanks, Beth. Janet.
Yes, I'm Janet Swim. I'm a professor at Penn State University. I was president, I think 2012, 2013, sometime between Susan and Thomas. And so I was waiting to see what Thomas, your Thomas said, but I think you were the recruitment. I know you were the graduate student recruitment, Beth. So when you said 2012, that's why I picked 2012.
Great. Elise?
Hi, I'm Elise Amel. I'm a professor in the psychology department at the University of St. Thomas. I was president starting in 2015, and prior to that had been conference co-chair for a couple years. And then I was also in 2007 part of the executive committee under Susan as treasurer. And I'm currently the fellows chair.
Thanks. Daniel?
Hi, I'm Daniel Benkendorf, and I'm an associate professor of psychology at the Fashion Institute of Technology based in New York City. And before becoming the president-elect this past year and the program chair for this virtual convention, I served as treasurer. And yeah, I feel like I'm a relative newcomer, and I'm standing among giants. So I'm pleased to be here.
Thanks, Daniel. And Thomas?
Hi, I'm Thomas Doherty, speaking from Portland, Oregon, where I work as a psychologist in my own business, my own private practice. And I had to look up my dates, but 2014 was when I served as president of Division 34. And I think I've done some other roles, although I can't remember what they might be. And currently I am helping to coordinate the Climate Change and Mental Health Working Group, which has a mission to help support clinicians and healthcare providers that are intervening with climate change.
Great, thank you all. So I'm going to start us off with I think what to me is the big question. So we're living in a crazy moment, right? We're living in this moment that feels so monumental with respect to the economic and social and racial and environmental and political challenges that we face individually and collectively and within our country and across the globe. And it feels to me, and I know because I talk with many of you, that it feels to you as well like a moment that demands the most of each of us, that demands the most of the communities that we belong to. And all of you, of course, are longtime members and leaders of this particular community, of the Society for Environmental Population Conservation Psychology. And so I asked all of you to reflect a little bit on thinking about your own experiences in leadership in this community and just kind of thinking more broadly. And I want to ask you where you see the critical leverage points as we're looking ahead. We're looking at the challenges that are in front of us in 2020 and beyond. What are the leverage points for us to increase our positive impact on the world? I mean, this is a big question, but what can and should we be doing, both as individuals, but also collectively as a society and is this set of fields, environmental population conservation psychology. And I think this is an important part of that question, is there anything that we should be doing differently than how we've done things in the past? And if you want to reflect on your own personal work and the way that you've approached what you've spent your time on for your career, that's great. If you want to reflect on kind of the bigger picture questions of ourselves as a collective unit of environmental population conservation psychologists, that would be great as well. So I'm going to open it up to anybody. I don't want to call on folks unless necessary, but what can and should we be doing as we move forward?
I'll just dive in with something here because and Elise, you might want to join me in this. Elise and I have been in over our heads doing the revision for the 5th edition of Psychology for Sustainability, our textbook that is primarily directed at undergraduates. And so the last edition we were working on in 2014, the amount of research since then is overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. And so we thought, oh, we'll update this and we'll update that. And instead it's rabbit hole after rabbit hole. And, the deep dive into the literature. And what has become so apparent to me is there is a huge wealth of information that needs distillation and to be simply communicated outside of our silo, outside of, just to each other in our journals. And some of that is happening, but it's, it's very challenging to take the research and put it into everyday language in simplistic terms with key points that are applicable for people who aren't steeped in the jargon and steeped in the theories and so forth. But I think that's something that's really necessary because it's just not gonna it's not going to have much of an effect if it doesn't get out there. So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. I don't know what form that would take. I don't know, how that happens, but I think more of that would be very useful.
Yeah, this is Beth. I can add in a little bit from kind of the applied side. I think we're in this really exciting time where there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of interest. Climate advocacy and justice organizations are becoming increasingly vocal, growing in their ranks, membership, funding, and so I think we get to we have the opportunity and the challenge of figuring out how we can be of value, and it's maybe different than we thought. I don't think we need to be the advocators or communicators of need, but for climate work or for environment, thinking about the environment and our role within it, which maybe is something that a lot of us focused on earlier in our careers, but now figuring out how we can be of service respectfully to people who know a lot about what they do and just don't have the science background, and figuring out, to get, in the words of Alexander Hamilton, or actually it was the guy that shot him, the room where it happens, right? To try and figure out how we can get in the room and how we can be respectful and play an appropriate role in that room, and how we can, in that room, learn from advocacy organizations, best practices, synthesize them with what we know from the science, and then add some nuance on, here are all these different strategies. Here's how to select which ones work in which situations. I think what's happened is that there's a lot of people that are very aware of the fact that you can do pledges and you can do goal setting and this and that, but how and when is somewhere where I think we can really be useful, and we need to think more about maybe education, training, partnership, strategy, support for organizations out in the world that are doing this work and getting more attention doing it.
So I'll jump in. I think we would all agree that what we need to do is to figure out how to get our message out there and how to talk to other people and how to use the language that will be most helpful for our audience, whether that be people on the ground doing conservation work or public officials or the general public. I think we also need to think about what's holding us back as good. Many of us are social psychologists, so looking at the environmental conditions. And I think that the training still that people get, particularly in graduate school, and the employment conditions can lead us away from being useful and lead us towards wanting to reinvent the wheel over and over, as opposed to trying to learn what other people have already invented or discovered. So as we think about what we can do as individuals, I think it's really helpful to think about any way to have influence over the sort of conditions of what it means to be. I'm speaking primarily from the academic point of view, but I think any of us, our professions can lead us to be narrower than I think we would like to be. So to at least remember, occasionally step outside of our job conditions and think, how can I do things slightly differently than my job calls me to do?
I'd like to riff off of Susan talking about, where you work as being a really critical lever for making change. And we all differ in terms of our employment circumstances, but most of us, whether we're employees or volunteers or in a club or whatnot, like the organizations that we're in, we have a lot of potential to change. And if you change things at the organizational level, then it affects whole bodies of people in a way that's different than individual choices. So I really think it's important to dig deep and be transformational leaders. There's a huge literature on what's needed in times of crises, and it boils down to being trusted and being verbal and vocal and enthusiastic about your vision of the future, and empowering other people to do things differently. And so sometimes we aren't in official power positions, but that's not the most critical thing. It's who you are and how you are changing the circumstances around you.
I'll jump in here. I think in addition to being a good leader, we also have to think more about how to connect with one another, because I think one of the biggest challenges for members of this division is we tend to be pretty siloed. We may be the only environmental or conservation or population psychologist in an organization or a department. And while that can be great for getting us to do interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work with others, I think we miss out on opportunities to really sort of refine and strengthen our craft of iteration and refinement before we launch the survey or before we launch a program. And I think there's a real risk that we don't get substantive feedback until very late in the process from either community members that don't like something about what we're doing, or, you know, the dreaded reviewer number 2. And, you know, what is it that we can do as an organization and within our community to provide opportunities to bounce ideas? I've always, for the last, I don't know, 5 or 7 years, have been in organizations where I'm surrounded by economists or people in a business school, and I learn from what they're doing, and I see how they really have that working paper concept of, I'm going to put these ideas out there and get a lot of feedback and keep refining this. It's much slower than how we work, but I think there's something there that we need to be thinking about of how do we connect people who are in these different campuses and different departments so that they're learning from different labs and different organizations and getting the feedback to make the research stronger at the beginning rather than during the revision process.
I think I'd like to jump in after Kim. I've been thinking more about how I think our challenge is in a retail advertising problem. Right now, I think that a lot of our work is very academically interesting, but it is not built a market for its own space. So I hear people trying to hire people into roles that we could fill, but the assumption is that we're just sort of answer bots, that we're not actually researchers, you know, advancing theory. And so I think partly there's misconceptions about what we know already, even though there's been a lot written, and Elise, that I know you're dealing with. I think our challenge is, what are we doing? What are the questions we're asking right now? And what is the role we are as part of the psychological enterprise? I think we still have the challenge that psychologists are perceived as a retail service phenomenon rather than something that can work at a systems level or at an organizational level that Elise was talking about. So I think the work is there, but I think we also need to reflect our role as social advocates for the type of work we can do and are doing. And I'm thinking about that both within APA, and then the deficit that I've been really concerned about is, you know, right now with the pandemic, behavioral compliance with recommendations for keeping people safe. There is not a psychologist's voice on the media. And we keep talking to epidemiologists, and they describe why this is failing. They don't describe the behavioral issues that are causing the failure with compliance. And it's embarrassing that our association isn't reaching out to do that and place psychologists in that place so that our work in environment conservation or population can be part of this bigger enterprise. So I think we need to help push the boundary by saying, you know, we have to change that narrative.
Yeah, I could follow up on that. I mean, I think psychologists' voices are also absent, and just we've changed it a bit in climate change, but psychologists' voices are also absent in much in the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the things that are going on with the protests and the impacts of the protests and things like that. But you know, to Ezra's question, what I thought about was even farther back, just the nature of this division kind of speaks to what Johnny was saying a bit. But thinking about this division itself, you know, the first it was an environmental division, and it was kind of environmental and population psychology years ago. And so the division has been organized kind of reactively, right? And there's been people doing certain research, so they've been pushed together in a group, but not necessarily proactively as who we are and who we want to be. And I've been thinking a lot about this. We don't have really some of the older generation of presidents in this call, but thinking of the controversy around the renaming of the division, around introducing the conservation psychology term into the division. This was, I guess, in the early aughts, you know, the idea of, you know, eco-psychology and environment and the broader environmental movement. And I think that was you know, in hindsight, a really missed opportunity for the division to kind of move forward. We kind of contracted there, and there was a lot of, you know, more academic politics about the nature of the division and sort of turf issues. And I think that whole discussion would go so differently now than it did at that time. And I think that contraction and more academic contraction into just this, you know, this SEPSEEP, this, you know, this the acronym that we have, you know, it's left us, you know, unprepared for this moment, somewhat unprepared for this moment, and it does create a little bit of an advertising, you know, issue. So I do wonder about taking an opportunity to really revision what this division is, and really thinking even about its name and its focus a little bit, to make it a little more broader and a little more open to people, because I think there's a ton of people that are hungry for what we can offer across all areas in psychology and in the public, and they don't know what to make of us. Okay. And so that's kind of where I went with this question.
Although, Thomas, I think that we could do more as a division, as part of the divisions for social justice. I think that what might be useful in the future would be for us, as part of the divisions for social justice, to advocate for more cross-pollination, or literally looking at mission alignment across the divisions for social justice, because, well, that is a nice bucket that we got put in, sort of as you were describing earlier. I don't think we've done any crosswalking between those disciplines to see what our flavor is inside this, you know, Heinz 57 variety of what is psychology. But I think we could do a lot more, because there is so much in what we do that has social justice implications, as you were saying.
I'll jump in here too. I would just say that I think it's okay to preen a little bit too on our collective accomplishments. I mean, and I think, you know, when I look at this panel, I see so much that has happened, that people have done. And I think that's a testament to the work ethic of the people here, but also just to the passion and engagement. And I think the main issue is we've got to grow our division. We've got to get bigger. I don't think numbers are everything. I don't think that, you know, makes us, you know, it's not a popularity contest, but I think we need real membership, we need a membership that's engaged, and we need people who are going to join us. And I think I would second what Thomas said, and also Johnny, that there's so many people out there that I have encountered that don't know that we exist, within APA, who are surprised that there's a Division 34, or who are intrigued by it, who aren't put off by it, or thinking, oh, that's not for me, but oh, let me hear a little bit more. So I would love to see us do more collaborating with other divisions within APA, since we are a part of APA. But back to the preening point, I think, you know, Britton started off here talking about her textbook with Elise and others. I mean, that's how you get the word out also. That's how, you know, it's having a resource like that. I use it in my class. Having a resource like that students are reading, and then talking to their family members and talking to their roommates, and then other students take the class. You know, there's not that many of us doing this work, and we're punching above our weight. So I think that's something we have to applaud. But, you know, not rest on, of course. We need to continue to do the work that we're doing. And then one other thing I would say too, and I think this goes back to maybe what Susan, what you were saying, was that, or maybe it was Johnny, about the different ways that we communicate and how we train graduate students, you know, and how we change incentive structures, particularly in academia, but in other places as well. You know, I've been thrilled to see so many of you participating in interviews, whether it's on television or on the radio or on podcasts. I think that's the kind of thing that, you know, people who aren't well versed in our discipline are going to hear, and then they're going to make it incumbent upon themselves to become versed in it, and they become interested. So that's what I would add.
And I think Daniel, it's interesting you talked about growing our numbers and that there aren't that many of us. And I think something that would be really interesting for us to take on is thinking about what we mean when we say us, right? So us, the people that go to convention and interact with each other, is a very small group. Us, defined as people who are doing work focused on refining ideas around how people respond to environments and climates, is a much larger group. Somewhere in the middle is people who self-describe as psychologists that do that work, right? And so there's this interesting definitional opportunity that and I think this is, Thomas, a lot of people were kind of getting at this idea that if we're clear, if we kind of broaden what we mean by us and make a bigger us, then maybe we'll be able, and prove our value to what are you getting if you self-identify as one of us, and ideally throw us $25 a year to be in our little group. Here's the benefit. You get this community, this, as Kim said, people that might peer review. I'm putting out an NSF grant and on the 18th and have reached out to several people who are members of this community to review our proposal, as opposed to getting reviewers at NSF doing it, and they're giving us time freely with love because of being a part of this community. So I think that's an opportunity for us to talk about who us is and expand our us, and that will get our numbers up. And then we'll have even more people to be proud of, because there's people out there. I occasionally see someone giving an interview going, why aren't they part of Division 34? That person's dope. I usually email them because that's who I am. But how can we do that? How can we make sure that everyone who's kicking ass, applying behavioral science insights to environmental issues, considers themselves a member of this group?
Yeah, I think that we're at this wonderful place right now in terms of interest in the topics we cover within the division. And those of us who've been in the field for a longer time remember when that was totally not the case. And most psychologists said, what on earth would I care about environmental issues for? There's a huge amount of interest, a huge number of people from other fields. I know particularly within social and developmental psychology doing this work, but they either don't know about our division or don't think that there's any point in joining. So I think it would be a great idea to think more about what can the division offer people, what services can it provide people. And I think one of the primary ones is that opportunity for connection. And I think there's been a huge amount of progress with the webinars, which have been great, but that's something that needs to be kind of a continual focus, like how can the division be of service to its members?
So let's go with that question, since we've got two of our upcoming future leaders with Daniel and Kim on this call. So maybe I'll pose this question in two parts, one to the past presidents and then one to our incoming and future presidents who are here. I think one part of the question is just what would our past presidents, what kind of advice would you like to give to our incoming leadership? And specifically this question that Susan's posed and that I've certainly posed to many of you at multiple times over the years, which is, what can we be doing practically, concretely as a society, particularly as the leadership of the society, to make it worthwhile for people and to actually have an increased impact? What are the concrete things that we can and should be doing? So maybe we'll start with the past presidents if anybody's got great ideas. And then we can turn over to Kim and Daniel to give us a sense maybe of what they've started thinking about in terms of what they'd like to do concretely with this small organization moving forward. Anybody have any great ideas for our incoming leaders?
I think we've already started mentioning some. I think we talked about, several people talked about our PR problem. So brainstorming ways to communicate, identifying who are our internal and external stakeholders. So psychologists that aren't members of the division. And I would say people who are in the applied field that are doing work that might not be. And then identifying channels, doing what our research would suggest for our division, right? Identifying who are we trying to reach, where are they, and what's in it for them. And so maybe that's another committee or task force. Maybe that's something that the board just has a plan to take on, but I think that that would be a really great start, and figuring out like where the energy is right now. And again, how we can do that respectfully without like going into communities and saying, you need us. But figuring out where and how we can add that value and bring people in.
I would add that there's a really impressive global community of people out there that we need to be much more involved with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's easier now than ever, now that everything's going virtual, right? Like we had but reaching out to the European group, the South Asia, there's a BET group in Behavior, Energy, Climate Change group in Japan. Like now we saw the Behavior, Energy, Climate Change conference. We have the most international registrations we've ever had. Not shocking because we're online. So that would be this is the perfect time to do that, Elise.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, it's a challenge being an officer in the division. I found I had a lot of big ideas, but I was, really focused on just management. And when I was president, I ended up spending most of the time on the budget and clarifying issues that we had with the budget. Beth was the treasurer at that time. We worked together. So a lot of it was a really important energy, fixing up some of the budget issues, and then working on the conference and just working on some of the things. There's a lot of built bureaucratic actions that have to happen that limit our ability to make big, wide-ranging change, and that's just the nature of the game. Although the division seems to be very healthy right now, so I think the new leaders are really lucky in that regard. It seems pretty healthy and pretty vibrant. But I would really encourage the incoming leaders to have some energy on the bureaucratic, on the organizational, self-replication that we do with these professional organizations, but really saving some energy for some wholesale innovation. The behavioral, energy, climate change conference works because it's focused on goals. People come to that across all kinds of fields, but we still focus on environment, conservation, population psychology. And so I'd love to see our division be called the Division of Environment. And then we have sub-issues on conservation, sub-issues on climate change, sub-issues on energy, to where people say, oh, we want to work on these things. People don't care really about conservation psychology or eco-psychology or environment. They care about issues. And can we make it clearer that our division works on these issues and serves the public in this way? So that's where I always go with the division. How do we reframe ourselves, who the us is, to draw all these people in? So I think balancing not getting caught up in the minutia of the bureaucracy, but really thinking about the big picture.
I was going to say that my experience coming in, and I hope it's different, was that there was no, and I tried to change this, that there was no records about anything. I had no idea what happened before me, no idea what happened after. Beth was trying to put together a manual for this whole thing. And then my experience was that next year just went away. And so there was no consistency from year to year. I was trying to build a base, and maybe it's different now, but I was trying to build a base for that we could, and I say this in response to Thomas in a sense, that a fair amount of my work was just trying to figure out what else had been done and where it was going. And the other thing that I tried to do is to encourage incoming presidents, so this would be advice for Kim, is to spend this year planning what you're going to do next year, because next year you will be doing all the things that Thomas said. And I'd also like to think about maintaining some of the strengths, so that Ezra has put together these webinars, and that's great. And I think that's a sort of service that really connects people. And I think I don't know what the attendance was like and all that, but I think that's really something that is worth maintaining. And the group, this mental health and climate change group, I think is really important. And it's really important because that's how we're going to make connections to a lot of psychologists, with many of them being in clinical psychology. And we're missing that huge component of people. And for us to be able to start with that, I think that's really important to do. And I think it's important to look out, and I don't know how to solve this, is that we say we need more members, but if you go to SB, the social psychologists, there's a lot of people there, but they're not members of us. And so, well, why is there this group, this splintering group? It's in some sense, I think it's because we're not providing them with something that they need. And they're getting it somewhere else. And so there are people who want to do it, but they don't know about it, don't know where it is. There's still undergraduates who come up and they say, I never heard of environmental psychology. Well, how many times, why not? Why is it so novel still? So that's the advertising part. But the service that we could give, I think back to just having a tighter structure, building on what we do have, and that's what people have done before as well. Anyways, I guess there might be opportunities, back to being opportunities that we could make these connections. And I tried to, actually, when I was president, we had a joint conference with SPICY, trying to get into the intergroup relationships overlap with environmental psych. And there may be other opportunities to make those sort of bridges, but the bridges have to be maintained or they just wash away, so.
Maybe we can think about it more as a network than about as, this group and that group. And, that has a whole different set of dynamics associated with it.
I mean, I do want to say, Janet, that some of the infrastructure work you did really did lay the foundation for the year. By the time Beth and I arrived, we had an operator's manual. That was wonderful. We've upgraded the operator's manual, and our current secretary, Reuben, has been diligent about making sure it's getting upgraded again. So I think that we have got a good, Kim and Daniel are getting handed the wheels to a car that has all the parts in it right now, or sorry, a bicycle that has all the spokes on the wheels. So you are in a good place. And I think we've done some good work trampling the path into the APA administration. And Daniel, I think some of the work you did with Divisions for Social Justice on the conferences here, the advantage of the pandemic is that people see a lot more crossover than we've seen in the past, because we were able to collaboratively design programs that met the needs of a number of divisions. So I think some of that foundation is there, and I'm worried about losing some of that momentum that we've achieved, in part because Beth was pretty vocal with the science directorate. The CEO certainly knows my name. So, I think we can do a little bit more for making the case for why our work is so central. And I think Janet and Susan have done a wonderful job of demonstrating the need at the senior administration level. They're definitely the go-to names that get brought out whenever there's environmental issues on the table at APA. So I think the groundwork is there. Now our job is to say, we aren't a few people, we actually represent a collective, and trying to bring people in because we have purpose for them in our political roles.
As far as the strengths and where you can go with is one of the things that Susan knows this, but the rest of you might not know it, is that APA, before the pandemic, was putting together a large climate change efforts. And so we were in, and this is international, so we were in Portugal and brought together many different countries. And that each one of those countries put together a plan for psychology and climate change in their country. And then spurred by that, in some sense, APA was like, well, we're going to do that too. So we did get sidetracked with COVID, but it's still there. And the Board of Scientific Affairs is still on track to get back to that. We can thank Howard on the BSA for really carrying that for a long time. So there is, that is good that we do have that support, but it would be good for Division 34 to be active. And I think making connection with this group that Thomas is a part of is going to be really important for that committee.
So I have a concrete thing that I thought Kim was headed there with one of her earlier comments. So, something that I think is both a strength, but also a significant potential source of weakness for our society and broadly for our field is the diversity of approaches and trainings that people get. And I think Susan also mentioned this in terms of how we train our graduate students, how we train people into the field. So, that diversity can be an obvious source of strength when it comes together and there's a broader framework within which people can fit themselves and see how their approach to solving questions or to asking questions and solving them fits with what else is going on. It can be a weakness when everybody is really siloed. And I think we do have some deficiencies at a very broad scale in terms of how we train people to do good science and to do good application of that science in real world settings. And I would love to see over the next couple of years the division find virtual ways to help people get that training beyond the particular programs that they're in or wherever they've ended up after their training. So webinars that's one way to do that, but there's also, Reuven ran a really cool hands-on workshop yesterday. It took an hour to help somebody think through a concrete problem they had and to give people with, from undergraduates to kind of senior researchers, a chance to work together to think through over the course of 60, 90 minutes, how might we solve this problem? It's a kind of model of a hands-on workshop where you get a lot of benefits. You get the direct benefit potentially to a client, for example, the person who's posing the problem, but also the younger students have creativity, but they don't necessarily have all of the theory and concepts or know what's been out there and tested. And folks who've been around for a while know a lot, but they also sometimes can lack creativity. And so I would love to see us do some hands-on things. And now that everything's going virtual, this is definitely a silver lining of the pandemic, is that there's nothing keeping us from running a webinar, a social hour, and a workshop every month with different people. Yeah, there's some organizational work to it, but I think, as Thomas was saying, or someone else was saying, we can have multiple committees that are running those events for you, so that it's not all on the president, especially the kind of more embedded those institutions become or structures become in the larger organization. And we could be doing something every week of the year that's offered, and even if it's only to 20 people that show up at any given event. Now we're offering really concrete stuff. We're offering community, we're offering training, we're offering insight into the newest research that's out there or things that are coming from outside of our field. We have a question in the Q&A from Ruth Richards asking, moving ahead, how can we participate or are we going to be working with other divisions within APA? And I want to expand that to think about, well, how do we really participate and engage with organizations that are beyond just APA as well. So those are things that we could do, and I would love to see the two of you take those kinds of things on, and I'm happy to be part of that and to make it happen.
I like the idea of doing that with other divisions, because if we're not part of the annual conference program, it may be easier for us to do that kind of crosswalking with some of the other divisions that Ruth was mentioning.
Yeah.
I wanted something, when you started talking, Ezra, made me think about just the diversity of professional roles that are represented in our division, and thus a wide range of graduate training. And I thought it would be interesting to do maybe on the Facebook page something like, the APA does this "how did you get that job" kind of profile in the magazine, just a short profile of somebody in a different position, just to give a sense of the range of ways in which Division 34 members do their work. So I get questions like that from potential students all the time, like, how I'm interested in psychology and the environment, what can I do? So
I love that. It's kind of like a Reddit Ask Me Anything, but we could do it in a live format, right? Where you just get somebody and just tell your story. I remember Thomas's presidential address was very autobiographical. As the most probably clinical person of us, it was like deeply personal, where a lot of the rest of us are like, here's my data points. And I still remember it. I don't remember everyone's presidential address, but I remember Thomas's, because Thomas talked about Thomas, and it was beautiful. And I think sharing that is like a gift we can give each other, is like our own stories, because we can, like Daniel said, you all inspire me. I mean, Janet inspired me to not give up on grad school and join the division, and all of you throughout my career. So I love that. And I think that's such low hanging fruit, because no slides necessary.
the other thing I'll just quickly bring up is, probably most of you know about the interdivisional grant program that APA runs and that Janet referred earlier to, some money we had gotten to do a shared, coordinate some programming between Division 9 and Division 34. I think that's it takes a little effort, but it's a great way to prompt some collaborations with other divisions. And I think that would be a really positive way forward for Division 34, is to do more collaboration with other divisions.
So maybe I'd turn it to put Daniel and Kim on the spot a little bit to think about, or even just share a little bit about what you're thinking in the nearish term future for the division. And also, this is your opportunity to ask and get the 8 of us on the hook for doing things in front of a live audience. Where are the places that we can help you as you're trying to think about what comes next?
Well, I can jump in since I'm on the hook for in the immediate future, and then I'll let Kim jump in too. I want to keep the train on the tracks. I mean, I feel like there's been much progress in just the short time that I've been a member of the division. And, I've heard the stories. I know what you're talking about, Thomas, when you talked about fixing the budget. And, we're in a really fortunate, Kim and I both will be in a really fortunate position to have a healthy budget, to have a healthy community, to have, I think, a lot of consistency in our goals too. So, and I think in the past, that's been one of the problems, is that you do sometimes have these, really inconsistent year to year sorts of goals between presidents. So I don't think we're facing that. Ezra and I have talked about, and he's already committed, and I think he's already got all of the speakers for the rest of this year for the webinar. And I am absolutely committed to continuing that through the rest of my presidency and past presidency, and working with Kim on that. So that is a long-term service that we will be offering to our members, without a doubt. And then one thing that I've thought about, but don't want to commit to at the moment, is a mid-year conference. So talking about this virtual conference that we're all part of now, it's been a lot of work, but it's also a lot of work because we weren't expecting to do it. But it's actually turned out kind of wonderful, and despite the APA system crashing multiple times on Thursday, but it's actually within the realm of possibility. And I'm willing to partner with all of you to make something like that happen, be it next year or the year after, so that we can offer another venue, another vehicle for our members to participate in a conference, something that's much tighter in terms of disciplinary interest. It might be really good. So I would want to discuss that obviously with the executive committee and with all of you. I'm kind of throwing it out there as an idea. Because I wouldn't want to counter program against some of the other great conferences that are out there. But is this something we could be offering? And then why don't we? Also, I'm really interested in working with the students a bit more. So I just popped in last night to the virtual student happy hour, and I was struck by just the enthusiasm. I mean, I work with students all the time, as many of you do, and I love students. And so I think it was refreshing to see kind of the wide-eyed interest that they have. And I would like to give them an opportunity to get more involved in the division in ways that feel really impactful, and get them to meet some of or all of you and talk to you about what you're doing. Have more of that within division intergenerational conversation. So I'm going to be looking for ways to do that. And also, and I think Ezra wants to talk about this a little bit in the moments remaining, but I'd really like to focus inward a little bit and think about how, this is kind of to Johnny's point, but I think a little bit broader, how do we partner with the divisions for social justice? How do we do that more? I think we put together, I think, what is a great couple of sessions this year, but I'd like to see that continue into the future. But also looking at our students, I was struck by how much more like the general public they look than even this group does. So thinking about things like diversity, equity, inclusion, how do we better represent the people who are interested in us? And I think as people who hold power and elite positions, I think that it's partly incumbent on us to make that happen. And so I'd love to hear your ideas about how to do that.
I echo a lot of what Daniel has in mind. I think I will just say I don't know how long I've been a paying member of Division 34, but I've probably been on the listserv for about 17 years. And I thank all of you, because I have definitely seen that our purpose has become more focused, and it's become much more than what just felt like a nice listserv to go to when you had a question. So I thank you for giving us a car that's drivable, as Johnny said. And, you know, I would definitely echo Daniel's point about a conference. So I'm chairing the sustainability pre-conference to the SPSP or convention this year. Look for announcements on that soon. And there are many of us who are in both groups, and I feel like the broken record whenever I get to see a lot of you of how do we have more of a conference home? So I think that there's mutual interest there of, you know, building something bigger, whether it's a network or a collective. And I'm excited to hear that Daniel also has that aspiration. And so maybe we can make that happen. I think this issue of identity is an important one. I've had, by coincidence, several students reach out to me in the past week saying they want to know more about environmental psychology. And as I started to go online to try to figure out where to send them to, I realized they're never going to be able to make sense of this because there's so many different versions of environmental psychology. And I think we need to have a little bit more of a shared identity so that we can have some more goal-directed activities. And I think that's probably pretty important. I'm totally with you, Daniel, on wanting to grow our membership. And likewise, to Ezra's earlier point of getting some of the junior people more involved, and we have this diversity in methods and training. I love the webinar series and would love to see that continue. I'm also wondering if we need to be thinking about sort of a virtual brown bag so that people can be presenting stuff in progress and getting feedback from other people, whether that is you're a practitioner trying to do a community program or you're a graduate student trying to figure out how to do your study. It would be nice to have that kind of community. I mean, I think that's where we stand to strengthen as a field, where you can get that immediate feedback and make the research better to start with. I sort of have this pipe dream that at some point in my life, when someone asks me what I do and I say environmental psychologist, they don't give me this blank stare of what is that? I really think we need to keep working to have more street cred so that, as Beth said, I was actually going to use this line too, so that we're in the room where it happens and people realize, oh, we need one of those psychologists that can help us think about that. I guess the last thing I'll say is, and this speaks to the identity issue, is thinking about, you know, environmental psychology. It has, for many people, they only think about it in terms of environmental issues, and we forget that broader definition of environment. And I think in terms of working with outside divisions, it can be, I sometimes wonder if people think, oh, they're just interested to, like, they're tree huggers. And we need to think more about, I hate to use that word sustainability because it has such a broad definition, but how can we think about the other divisions that really connect with environmental issues? We know from our research that people don't necessarily relate only for environmental reasons to different issues. Adam Pearson, our early career award winner, originally was a diversity and prejudice researcher. We need to be thinking about who are the other people like that that we can sort of bring into the fold and really help strengthen our field overall.
Yeah, and this just brings up, you know, diversity issues in our division and class issues and this perception that environmental issues are a class, you know, kind of an elitist kind of thing. Even our group here, all, you know, white faces and things like that. So I think, again, focusing on the goals versus the academic structures, the disciplines, focusing on, you know, social justice, you know, I think that's where people are hungry, that's what people are hungry for.
And I do think, I mean, to Kim's point and also to Thomas's, that the more the more we offer in terms of opportunities for people to engage, the more accessible we become by definition. And there'll be work to do in terms of making sure that who shows up to the things that we offer is reflective of the larger community. But I do think, I love the idea of brown bags. You know, the brown bags that I went to as a graduate student were in social psych, because that was one part of my training, and that was great, but it was limited, and it's limiting in terms of, I had to go out beyond that to go figure out what else you need to understand in terms of how people make decisions and why people do what they do, if you want to be an effective environmental psychologist or conservation psychologist. And I think because there aren't any programs that are that large anywhere in the US, most of us who are actively training graduate students are the only person, or maybe there's a couple of us at our institution, that there's a way for us to do some of this cross-institutional training and support of one another. And I think a virtual brown bag is an opportunity that would be fairly easy to put together. And it's the kind of thing where it could be offered every week, potentially, right? Or every other week, where we see each other's faces and we bring new people in and do some of this kind of the field building and improvement that Kim is also talking about, that she sees in other fields, that I also see in other fields that we don't do a lot of, just that kind of early critical but supportive feedback to people in the work they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we sort of pull back the curtain on how research is done, because we are a rather siloed field. You know, what you see in the published paper does not say anything of the struggles of how they got there. And I think the more we can, especially help junior folks understand that, or even folks who are practitioners and just getting their feet wet in that space, understand how to navigate different barriers that they come across, could do a lot.
We have a question that just came in from Teresa Klein, and I guess this is really looking towards our future leaders. Would you consider doing some programming for community college students that are often left out of the conversation and have limited course availability?
Definitely. I mean, I think of us as being open to anyone who is interested in this field, whether you are an academic at an R1 research institute or not. And that may speak to our need to look for additional communication channels to make sure we're reaching the folks who want to be here.
And I think that gets to what I was talking about earlier about defining what us means. Like, I was invited to give a workshop on behavior change at the Association for Commuter Transportation a couple of years ago. And I realized I started doing more research on this organization, and I would consider the entire organization to be a behavior change organization, right? Because it's commuter transportation. So I said at the start, I'm not teaching behavior change. I'm teaching a behavioral science approach or social science approach to behavior change, and like letting them feel like they already are doing the thing that I'm teaching them, and I'm just up leveling them. So I think if we kind of like just some small definitional changes to what we means, which is like not has a PhD and or a faculty appointment and has published in this field, but anybody who's working towards these goals. And I think, Daniel, that's something like, you know, we can, members of this group and beyond who are listening can contribute to, and that would be a great goal, Daniel, for your, you know, early tenure, to do that initial work. And then from that into Daniel's year and going into Kim's, then once we've decided who that is, reaching out with lots and lots of open arms with all the relationships that so many of us have made within other divisions and outside of the American Psychological Association. I feel like a lot of us are like really already doing that work and would love for that to be a more formal part of the division.
It seems like going forward, just a lot of the folks here in this call and in this group do consulting of various kinds, and it seems just getting that consulting identity and that sense of us as consultants more broadcast, I think would be helpful in general, and would serve a lot of focuses, because I don't think we really ever talk about that in our division or anything like that. But many of all of you on this call are consultants. So I think embracing a consultant mindset and a consultant role will serve any of the goals. So just an idea.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, that really comes full circle back to what I started with, which is about getting the information out to more broadly and in a way that can be understood and applied and used, you know, by people in these various places in the larger picture. And I think what you're saying, Thomas, about this consultant identity, that was really a big part of Carol Saunders' original vision for conservation psychology, was, you know, that we would, it's like, have tools, will travel kind of thing, that we're ready to get out there and help. So I would second what you said.
Very concretely, it might be nice to have a list of speakers and topics you're willing to talk about. And that would be something that APA could use, because when they get people calling in about questions, and then they call Susan and I don't know, maybe they call the rest of you too. But if we had another list, even just on the division webpage that says you're interested in this, call these people. So I think that would be really helpful. I was going to give a talk in Arkansas to the Recycling Commission down there, and because I had this podcast that was out, but because of Stephen Colbert, actually, they called me up, but anyways, I didn't think I was actually the best person for them, and I tried to convince them, and so I would have liked to have had a list of other people that say, no, call this person, they're actually better at this than I am. So it'd be nice to have that sort of list.
I wanted website needs. Oh, sorry, Elise.
It's okay.
I was just going to say, I think our website, one of the things I want to work on is the website. It's not in good shape. And I think that there's a lot that, you know, that's really where people land when they're Googling us. They land at that website, and it's not good. So, you know, we've had some success in recruiting students and so forth to help us, and we've been really grateful for their support, but I think we need to take the reins. And yeah, and I think Janet, that was a great suggestion that we'll do that. Sorry, Elise.
That's okay. I just wanted to add that, you know, aside from all of the really important and practical aspects of connectivity, you know, the access and identity and all that, it is just more fun to be connected to more people and to feel like you're doing stuff together as opposed to, you know, by yourself somewhere. So it's fun too.
Actually, with this panel, I found out the IO psychologist, every major IO meeting they have all the past presidents get together for dinner. And so that's a yearly thing that they do.
Well, and I'm thinking of making this a tradition. So Ezra started this panel, so I'm thinking that we might do something like this at least next year, and if Kim's up for it, the year after. So yeah, definitely, this has been great.
It has. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say that for anyone who's listening, who's on here and is wondering how you could become president or get involved, it's really easy. I joined my first APA. I went to my first ever APA convention as a graduate student in something called social ecology. So I didn't even know if I qualified to be a member. And I left 2 days later as the membership chair. And I don't know if like Kim, I don't know if I even joined officially for another minute or so year. But just email us. Like, this is a great group to get involved in. And there's always projects that people can, you know, find their way in. Cause I just want to say, like, the we is not this 10, maybe this goes without saying, but I want to say it, is not this 10 past presidents or the current members of the board. I'm off the board for the first time in a decade, and I miss you guys. I hated those meetings, and now I miss them. But it's everyone, and that we is like totally inclusive to anybody who has listened to us talk for the past almost 90 minutes. So please email. I'm volunteering. Daniel, myself, I'm not on the board anymore, but I'm still heavily involved, you know, so happy to be. So please, like, make sure that you are an us if you so choose.
And bring a friend or two or three.
Yeah, I would just say I totally support everything you just said, Beth, and 100% agree. I think that it is really easy to get involved. You know, I came in as an industrial psychologist like Elise. I went to APA back in 2014, intending to go to their program, got bored, was interested in the environment, started going to some of the programs put on by Division 34, and here I am. So we are a welcoming group. And I think that we are really, there are so many different kinds of people who make up this division. From a lot of different backgrounds, whether it's social psychology, which is, you're seeing represented well here, also industrial psychology, but I think our modal member is actually a clinician, so which is not surprising given that it's APA. So whatever your interest, we've seen a lot of interest from health psychologists lately, from Division I people, so everybody's welcome. Email me.
I think that's a really nice note to end on. So I want to just thank my 9 fellow panelists and presidents for attending, and it would be really nice to see all of you on a semi-regular basis. So I'm wondering if maybe we can set something up, especially to help Daniel and Kim really keep pushing the division forward to the next level of activity. And I think we really are, thanks to everybody who's on this call, in a strong position to move forward. I think there's some structural things that I can talk with Daniel and Kim about that we need to put into place if we're really going to get to the next level and keep it then going. Because structurally and how the division's set up, we're not quite ready to be doing 10 different things every month. But I think we can get there, and I think we can get there fairly quickly. And then from there, we'll be able to bring in a lot more folks and be offering a lot more out to the larger community. So I'm really excited. This was, I was really pleased to see you all, and thanks everybody who joined on the call. And Danny, you want to put in one final plug for tomorrow? We do have confirmation via email, so.
Yeah, this has been an interesting session. So a last minute session that came in, we have for Saturday, for tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. if you're out west, is a conversation with Dr. Philip Zimbardo and Shari Kuchenbecker on climate activism in youth. So join us for that.
Great. Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good job, Ezra.